Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 91 of the Alabama Liberal Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about war on reality, Comic-Con, Omicron, QAnon, and of course, Russia's con. Now, I want to, of course, get into Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, their war on Ukraine. Some would say their genocide in Ukraine. And Russia is basically the Ike Turner of countries. You belong to us. You can't get away from us. You're ours until we say you're not. And that's Putin's mentality specifically. I don't think a lot of Russian people want Ukraine back. I don't think that they really view it as very important to their destinies. So I think this is basically Putin's idea that the Soviet Union never ended, that it's still going on, and all of the former Soviet territory, it's all his to reabsorb, that he needs it all back. I mean, that motherfucker's probably going to declare war on Alaska pretty soon. We never should have sold Alaska. A common Western myth that Alaska belongs to the States, and he'll try to take that back. Putin believes that Ukraine is still part of Russia. What's to stop him from saying Alaska is still part of Russia? We're now in the month of March. The last time I saw you guys was in February. I'm basically doing a podcast every month. March is a very appropriate month for this episode because it's the only month of the year that's a verb, right? It's a command. March, damn it. Action word in the calendar, and there's been a lot that's happened. I mean, I almost can't believe how much news in the last 6 weeks that there has been. So much bad news, mostly out of Ukraine and Russia, but not just there. I mean, there's just bad news all the way around. I mean, celebrities are dropping dead left and right. You almost can't believe how many celebrities have died this year. It's been more this year than all of 2021. William Hurt, he just died a couple of days ago. He was a great actor, and so Betty White is dead, Sidney Poitier, Louis Anderson, Bob Saget. I'm sure I'm forgetting a whole bunch of them. Chesley Christ is devastating to me. She used to be the Miss USA, and I remember her because when she won, I was like, oh, this is great. She's so attractive. She's kind of my celebrity crush. The Miss Universe pageant, I was like, I can't believe that they didn't pick her. She was screwed. I mean, she just looked so incredible and was so attractive and smart and interesting to watch, and she's an entertainment correspondent, and I always look forward, seeing her interview people. Apparently threw herself out of a building, and that really shows you the extent that the last few years have gotten to people. 2020 and 2021 were so bad that the most attractive woman on the planet, I really think if you made an objective list of the 10 most attractive women on planet Earth, she would be on it, and one of the best looking women on the planet's like, I have nothing to live for. This kind of shows you that how worn down I think a lot of people have been over the last couple of years, and this is a little bit of a segue into the media. Because a lot of these things that I'm going to be talking about, this war on reality, is being aided and abetted by the media. And times have been so dark and apocalyptic. Like I said, one of the most attractive women on the planet throws herself out of a building, but she works in the media. And the media has been, for the last couple of years, everything is apocalyptic. And yet as I'm watching the news, it strikes me that they're very ill-equipped for something like Ukraine, which actually is bad news. It actually could spiral into World War III. They really don't know how to deal with something like that. That's like actually could be a huge news story. And watching it, we've got the Comic-Con version, which is the frivolous news that doesn't know really how to do it. And they're interviewing people in Ukraine, and it's very clear that they don't know how to talk to these people. And then you have the Omicron, which is all just negative and apocalyptic, and it turns out to be a big fizzle and FUD. Remember, Omicron, we were all going to die from that. That was going to be even worse than the original COVID-19 strain. It was needless fear. And then you have the QAnon, which is conspiracy theories, rampant misinformation, disinformation, deliberate disinformation. People sometimes make money off of that. It's recently been revealed that QAnon is Ron Watkins, the guy that we all kind of thought it was. It's a guy who, is he a government insider? No, he doesn't know Donald Trump. He never met him. He was the guy that QAnon was using his message board. So he's got a message board that's not very popular, so he invents a QAnon persona to drive up the clicks, drive up the traffic, but they're making it out like, oh, this is a Trump World insider. And then actual Trump World insiders like Michael Flynn are taking the QAnon oath to defend the world from the satanic baby eaters in the Democratic Party. And it's all a big elaborate joke and a hoax that somebody's using to kind of make money off of and boost their own profile. To show you the Ouroboros has fully eaten its own tail, the worm has fully turned. Ron Watkins is now running for Congress, so he's an Arizona congressional candidate. This is a guy who invented a persona as a government insider that was going to help Trump take out the baby killers. Nobody ever knew who the fuck he was that was actually in circles of government. But then they were like, oh yeah, QAnon, he knows what's up or whatever, kind of egging it on because it's beneficial for them and it's beneficial for him. His profile boosted. people help invade the Capitol, partially because of him. I watched this documentary on HBO called Q Into the Storm, and it was about the hunt for QAnon's identity, and it explained a little bit about the backstories. And Ron's dad is at the January 6th riots cheering him on like, yeah, let's do it, let's get everything. And they set the sequence beautifully to a Jefferson Airplane song called White Rabbit, because it is so surreal and trippy and kind of like, what are we even really seeing right now? And so you have to think about how unusual this is. A man invents a fake government persona that helps spur people to believe them. They believe his conspiracy theory nonsense and bullshit. They're following the breadcrumbs to every revelation he's giving that he pulls out of his ass. And then they're willing to help overthrow the real government because a fake government insider has told them to. And then because it was so wildly successful, that guy then decides, hey, I'll run for the government, right? I'll become a real congressman. We look at these games and these parlor tricks, and that helps us set up Russia's con, which is to basically say, Ukraine, we have to invade them because they're a threat to us. No, they're not. Ukraine, they want to invade Russia. No, they don't. Ukraine, they're going to build nuclear weapons. No, they haven't. There's no evidence of that. They're going to use biological weapons themselves. No, there's not. No evidence of that. They're going to kill all the pro-Russian people inside Ukraine. No, there's not. There's no evidence of that. Zelensky, he's going to become a dictator and he's going to kill his own people, and we're doing this to prevent a genocide. It's like, no, you're not. We know better than that. So they're running through all these excuses, and some people pick them up and they run them as though they're true, like Tucker Carlson, which of course we're going to talk about that. But there's a lot of people in the media that are indirectly aiding Putin without even probably realizing it. You have people like Tucker Carlson and Tulsi Gabbard that are very clearly puppets of Putin. House Republicans, there is a pro-Putin caucus, and you can see it with Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Madison Cawthorn, a couple of others. In the Senate, you've got Rand Paul, who's been a long-time Putin puppet, as we've always thought he has been. You have Trump out there stirring the turd. Within the media, you have Tulsi Gabbard, used to be a Democrat, basically got chased out of the Democratic Party, now is just a Fox News contributor or whatever. I don't even know what her job really is, but she's always on Fox News. And you have Tucker Carlson, who a lot of times, stuff he says on his show, they run it on Russian media verbatim. They just put subtitles on it. They don't edit it. They don't take it out of context. It's exactly what he means. And he's the guy that wants to go be buddies with Viktor Orban. He likes Putin. A few years ago, I made a video, How Did Russia Hijack Conservatives and American Conservatism? And basically, it's about race to an extent. Somebody like Tucker Carlson is a racist. He's a bigot. Russia's run by racists and bigots. Vladimir Putin is in her circle, supposedly called Obama the N-word behind his back. They have no respect for black people. When they hosted the Olympics, they literally put out a bulletin telling their women, say, don't have sex with foreigners because they all have AIDS. And he meant this probably for white Americans too, but they especially emphasized people that were black, not to have sex with them, don't pollute the bloodline, whatever like that. But they phrased it as, oh, we're worried about AIDS. The kind of same shit that a lot of American conservatives think. And I'm embarrassed to admit this, but when I dated black women pretty much my whole life, but earlier on, it was white women in college that were like, we don't want to date you because you probably got AIDS, talking to me that way. And they meant it. Like, they were serious. They really believed that. And a lot of that's just like the white superiority complex or whatever, white supremacy, where they think, oh, we're better than these other people. But you almost can't believe, I'm not very old. I was only in college about 10, 15 years ago. And you can't believe people that only a couple of years before Obama was elected president that they're saying this shit and that they mean that. Of course, I'm like, hey, that's fine because I'm not really that interested. You know what I mean? I wasn't really asking them to begin with. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, hey, did you do the study guide? We can't be with you because you're with Trina Williams. I'm like, yeah, I wasn't really offered or whatever, right? That was the mentality that was out there. And I think a lot of conservatives, they still have that mentality, like segregation in the Southeast. Black people need to use a different bathroom, a different water fountain. They have different diseases than we do. If you've seen that movie, The Help, you know how crazy this idea is of segregation, where they want to build separate bathrooms for their workers to use. These black women are in their house. They're raising their kids. They're changing their diapers. They're cooking their meals, doing everything short of breastfeeding their own kids or whatever. And I'm like, if they can be in your house, cooking your food, raising your kids, changing their diapers, doing all these intimate things, you know, you wouldn't let a stranger do it. A lot of people wouldn't let anybody do that kind of stuff. It's very intimate kind of things. But then say, oh, use a separate bathroom than us. Use a different water fountain. As you change our glasses, as you clean our own glasses that we drink out of, it's just really kind of fucking nuts to believe that way. But I think part of it, somewhat believe that the germs are different, but a bigger part of that is just we can't pretend that we are superior if we don't put in all these rules that kind of keep them down. And it was always a farce, segregation, because like I said, you're going to keep the races separate as they're in your home. But as long as we can say we sit here and you sit there, we're telling them what they can and can't do. They have to come to us to have approval for even basic little things because we're controlling them. Segregation is a police state. You can see some of that influenced in Florida where this this guy's a fucking problem. Well, let's talk about Trump on this podcast because he's the biggest problem out there. But I don't know if DeSantis is a whole lot better than Trump because a lot of what DeSantis is doing in Florida, it's taking the Southeast back to that culturally conservative proto-segregation time period where, like, just for example, you might have heard a lot about the Don't Say Gay bill. Well, that's just really the tip of the iceberg. Okay, so he is trying to make it harder to talk about sexuality in schools. You have different anti-transgender laws that Texas started. Now Florida's trying to pick them up. Some of the most terrifying are the pushback to critical race theory. We talked about critical race theory a little bit in some previous podcasts, but this is a theory that's been around since the 1980s. There's nothing urgent about it. It's not like Marcus Garvey's ghost is going to come back to life and march down the street, and there's nothing really that time sensitive about it. But now it's become a big deal, so Republicans can take back over state legislatures, state school boards, and then they can push through the shit they really care about, which is not critical race theory. They want to ban books generally. They want to stop people from talking about diversity. They basically want to prevent Barack Obama from ever becoming president again. Somebody like that. And if they can take apart the melding of the school systems, there's a lot of things from the culture wars that they still want to fight. The 60s and 70s, you think, oh, that shit's over. Well, for them, it's not over. So one of the most terrifying things is DeSantis calls the Stop Woke Act, which is basically saying kids can't learn about critical race theory in schools. Kids can't learn about race in schools. Talking about diversity or racism or anything that would make white students feel uncomfortable, you can't talk about that, and teachers can lose their jobs. Well, you know as well as I do that once you get to a certain age, like you're in high school or whatnot, it's very difficult to talk about history and not get into slavery, the Civil War, various things throughout. I mean, the study of history is basically a long slog through racism, tribalism, slavery, genocides, wars like what we're seeing in Ukraine and Russia. A lot of that stuff might make white kids feel uncomfortable, might make anybody feel uncomfortable. But you get into these conversations, and so trying to handcuff teachers into what they can and can't say is not a good thing. The act goes further than that, and it tells private businesses what they can and can't talk about. So private businesses a lot of times might want to do diversity and inclusion training. Useful. I think people should do this. I don't know that it will necessarily cure somebody of racism, but if it at least lets workers know what we expect out of you at this job. You can never fully change somebody's mind who doesn't want it to be changed. If they're going to be stubborn as fuck and if they're going to be racist in their off time, they can't really control that. But at this job, here's what we want you to be. And so to try to limit that from the governors telling private businesses what they can and can't talk about, basically don't make white people feel uncomfortable. He's basically said that almost verbatim, that there's too much making white people feel uncomfortable. This is kind of the white fragility that people have talked about. And there's a lot of people that unfortunately are very much on his page. And I know people might get tired of me criticizing Bill Maher. For a long time, I was totally supportive of this guy. The first 50 episodes of the podcast, oh, Bill Maher didn't mean that, and he didn't mean this, and he's great, and it's great to have him out there. And then it just gets harder and harder and harder to keep defending him over and over again. And ironically, even though he bitches and whines about cancel culture, we would have been better off if he'd been canceled. Because I believe it was either 2017 or 2018, he said the N-word when he was talking about Ben Sass. If he'd been canceled at that moment, then he could have gone out being like, oh man, Bill Maher was screwed. This is another situation where people were oversensitive, and man, I miss having him out there. Now I'm like, man, I wish he'd get canceled because it's the same droning on about the same bullshit every single week. He has increasingly terrible guests. He gets through the real news like Ukraine. He goes through that in 5 minutes just so he can have a guest whine about wokeness for 20 straight minutes. And the problem with that is he's become a useful idiot for the right wing. Russia has this term called useful idiot where probably somebody like, I don't know, Marjorie Taylor Greene or something, where they're basically helping them indirectly, even if they're not an active agent, which I believe somebody like Tucker Carlson is, but even if they're not an active agent, they can become useful to them just by spreading their propaganda. Probably they'll look at Bernie Sanders that way, truth be told or whatever, where I don't think Bernie's ever gotten direct help from the Russians, but they believe his his worldview is so similar in terms of America needs to retreat, America needs to stop spending so much money on their military, America doesn't need to interfere in foreign conflicts, America needs to be more diplomatically open. Henry Wallace, FDR's vice president, before he replaced him with Harry Truman, Henry Wallace was on that page. If he'd been vice president when FDR died, we would have been in a worse position to fight the Cold War, because he was all about, we need to share technology with Russia, we need to let them know about the atomic bomb, we need to show them how to do it, we need to basically not challenge them in any way. And I think Bernie is in that category of a useful idiot. Well, when I use that term for Bill Maher, what I'm saying is when he lets guests blather about fucking wokeness for 20 minutes, and I mean in a derisive way, he's helping somebody like Ron DeSantis and then calling it the Stop Woke Act, put in a Florida law. And this is very negative and very toxic, because my wife works in corporate America. And a lot of these things that they do, the diversity and inclusion trainings and the groups that they do, they are helpful, whether people realize it or not. They're not the be-all, end-all. And you still have racists and stuff in these corporations that make hiring and firing decisions. But to basically say, we're going to take that out to where we don't even want you to talk about this, we don't even want this addressed, it's chipping away gradually at civil rights laws. In California, they're pretty good. In Florida, they're already not that great. At some corporations in California, they're wanting a lot of their workers to move to Florida. These cheap fucks that run these companies, they're moving California corporations to Texas and Florida. Well, when you get to Texas and Florida, if it's to where we can't talk about race in the schools and we can't talk about it at work, and you're trying to control what we can and can't do in our homes in terms of gender and sexuality in our homes, to where we can be filed with child abuse, or why on earth would we want to go to the 1950s Southeast? It's segregation all over again, where there's this huge push to control what you can and can't do in your homes, who you can marry, who you can date, where you can sit on the bus, where you can go to a movie theater, who sits where when they go into a restaurant, making it basically impossible for interracial couples to exist. Well, a lot of these laws are chipping away at that same fabric. They're wanting to make it very difficult for people like me and my wife and our biracial kids who wouldn't feel welcome in a place like Florida with all this shit going on, because California is barely tolerant of us as it is. But then you move to a place like Florida and say, well, we're going to make the laws so unfavorable for people like you to exist. That comes out of a media culture, first that's either both sides, where it's both sides-erism, basically, where it's like, oh, well, both Democrats and Republicans, they both want crazy things. And then you tilt that further into where Bill Maher is, which is basically to say the Democrats have lost their minds. But if he hammers onto that and he latches onto that and he just goes on and on and on, it lends credence to the idea that what DeSantis is doing is really reasonable, because what he's trying to do is stop the left. Meanwhile, the reality of the country, and this is where war on reality comes in, we've probably never been more conservative economically. Rich people probably have never had it better ever in the history of the United States than they do right now and at this moment. But we constantly hear the left has gone crazy, the left wants too much. It's really not that much if you think about it. And even some of the biggest stuff that we do have, like Medicare and Social Security, Rick Scott, also from Florida, another fucking nut from Florida, put out this plan where he basically wants to attempt to sunset that out. Now, that's a very bloodless term for what he actually wants to do, which is to basically get rid of Social Security and Medicare. I don't even think most private industries want to do that. The health insurance companies, they love Medicare because people over 65, they don't want to have to cover them. That's where a lot of their biggest costs come in. People over 65 are the ones who mostly need to actually use their health insurance. Somebody like me in their 30s, we pay health insurance, we have health insurance. We don't have a lot of pre-existing conditions, not a lot of health problems. It used to be where if you did, that was when you could lose your health insurance. And they like people who don't cost them a lot of money, they don't have a lot of problems. Even if they do, they hope you have enough money you can pay for all of it on your own. But when you start getting to be old enough, they really don't want people like that in private health insurance, because that's where they'll lose money, and that's what'll take money away from them. That's what they kind of don't understand about that. For something like Social Security, again, private corporations may not want to hire somebody over 65. They kind of encourage people, especially if a job is very physical. Like what my dad did was a very physical job. Well, you don't see a lot of people in their 70s working at steel plants, and not maybe because they don't want to be active, but they can't do it, or they're a liability, or they get hurt, their shoulder hurts, their knees hurt. And so Social Security and that exists because it would be difficult for a lot of people in the working class to find jobs once they get to be a certain age. These are very easy things to explain to anybody who's listening, and I think even when they put this shit out there, I think they're further to the right than where a lot of corporations and businessmen are who don't necessarily want to get rid of these things. You tell these businessmen like, hey, we're going to cut your taxes to nothing. Okay, yeah, all right, party time. Yeah, and we're going to get rid of Medicare and Social Security. A lot of the private health insurance companies would be like, well, now wait a minute now, the no taxes thing sounded good, but how we get there maybe isn't so great. And I think that they're to the right of where a lot of these people are, and yet they run a state like Florida. Florida's got DeSantis as governor. It's got Rubio and Rick Scott as its senators. Rubio's wrong about everything. I mean, that fucking guy's an idiot. These are their senators and their governor. And of course, Trump lives there. And Trump set up his base there. That's sort of his home state now. And all four of these people, or three of the four, or two of the four, could run for president in 2024. And so between now and then, this place that is a purple state, or used to be considered a purple state. Obama won it both times. They had a Democratic senator for many years. The guy who used to be the governor, Charlie Crist, he had to defect to the Democratic Party because he thought they were just too crazy on the Republican side. This state that used to have some Democrats at the state level and used to go Democratic, I mean, it was purple, almost tilting blue, now has become the state where you're going to have these crazy men basically trying to outright each other all the way to 2024. They're going to be like, you said don't talk about critical race theory. I'm going to make it a law not to talk about it. You're going to make it a law not to talk about it. There's going to be a jail sentence not to talk about it. You're going to make it a jail sentence. I'm going to make it a death penalty case if a teacher comes in there and tries to teach our kids that racism is real, because they don't need to hear that shit. They're always going to be trying to get to the right of each other on these crazy cultural issues. And that is aided and abetted by a media that, quite frankly, likes the division. They like it when we're at each other's throats. They like it when we click on things and we tweet about things. They like cultural issues, because meanwhile, the big stuff that actually affects most people, nothing's getting done on that big stuff. I had an episode 2 episodes ago about forever chemicals. And 99.7% of people on this earth have forever chemicals in their bloodstream. As long as we're talking about transgender bathrooms and critical race theory in schools and what corporations can and can't talk about, and I'm to the left of all these things. I mean, I do think that they're important. But as long as people who will never agree are at each other's throats on these divisive cultural issues, then we're not talking about, well, why are our genes and our bloodstream so polluted from these filthy chemicals that we need to get rid of, that are essentially making it to where one of the side effects I didn't even mention, they make vaccines less effective. Kids are more sick today than they used to be, partially because there's more chemicals in the atmosphere and in food and everything. And you even talk about this, and they're like, okay, crazy boy, or whatever. I mean, but this is something pretty huge. Reports come out that climate crisis is even worse than we thought it was going to be. I tried to look up a map of what would happen if all of the icebergs melted. One of the reasons I mentioned an Alaskan cruise, people are saying if you want to go, you should go now before a lot of Alaska melts to where it doesn't even look like the same place anymore. A lot of the icebergs could melt, or stories about Greenland and how it's melting. So I looked up a little thing about what happens if all of the ice actually melts. Like, how much does the sea level rise and what does the country look like? The Southeast is basically underwater, if you ever want to look at those maps. But I mean, it really looks like the South specifically is, people say, oh, the South will rise again. The South will sink again, because Florida and all the way up to about North Carolina area, and then all the way east to almost to Texas, the fucking South is sunk. It's underwater. And so I'm looking at that thinking, you'd think the South would care more about climate crisis than anybody, considering just Florida alone, there's sinkholes, there's hurricanes, there's flooding. It's a mess. Texas has got droughts and forest fires constantly. I mean, it really has wreaked havoc on the environment. My parents talk about it raining in Alabama almost every day. See, in California, it almost never rains. There'll be like 5 days of rainfall every year. But they talk about, yeah, and you can hear it sometimes. I mean, it sounds like a damn monsoon is in the background, but it's just raining constantly. I actually would like that. I enjoy rain. If you look at a map and you said the West Coast is on fire, and the Southeast is basically getting 300 days of rain. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but some parts of it do get that much. Further south you go, getting all this rain and sinkholes and mudslides and floods, and really should wake you up to the effects of climate crisis. But you talk about climate crisis and people's eyes glaze over. The media is completely inept at talking about this. And when you get to something like Ukraine, a lot of these media people, they're interviewing people that are in Ukraine, and they're just like, oh, you're doing so great. How's it going there? That's great. I noticed the t-shirt. I was watching Stephanie Rule on MSNBC, and there was a guy on there. He had a shirt about Darth Vader, and she kept bringing it up, and she kept circling back to that and constantly talking about the shirt he was wearing. And the guy's kind of looking at her like, lady, I could get killed tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like, he's in the middle of a war zone, and she's wanting to kind of focus on things that are irrelevant. That's just one example. I'm seeing it a lot to where they're interviewing people in Ukraine and being like, hey, how's it going? Do you need anything? Is then like, yes, we need the United States to do more. We need just to send weapons. We need more troops. We need more munitions. If people want to volunteer, they can come to Ukraine. And then people are like, okay, we're going to send you some cat posters, some motivational hang in there type posters or something, because there's not a lot we can really do for them. If I were Biden, I might look at all the Proud Boys and all those groups, because America's got almost 1 million people in various right-wing groups. There's militias, there's Proud Boys. Okay, guys, we need you to live up to your duty. You said you wanted to save a democracy from fascism, right? We're going to send you to Ukraine, right? I'm like, maybe that'd be a good way to clear out some of these people and get rid of them. Episode ago or so, I talked about taking the women from Afghanistan that wanted to leave and maybe bringing them to rural areas in America where they desperately need a woman's touch. They need more women in these areas. These angry men who just get on different social media networks and spam the hell out of it with their comments all day, be like, hey, we need to put you guys to work. You've heard of the National Guard? This is the International Guard. And then they could send them over there. All the people that stormed the January 6th riots say, hey, we can suspend your prison sentence. They're like, okay, great, because I don't want to go to jail if you'll go to Ukraine and fight us. But I know we can't send active military, but the people that invaded the capital, those are pretty expendable. I think we could spare a few thousand of them, and they could be of some help to Ukraine. Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think they could be of some help to Ukraine if we want to send them over there. It's a matter of time before they do something truly nuts in the damn capital. Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's the kind of person that would challenge AOC to a duel. Just comes in there's like, pistols at dawn, bitch, you know. So they need to find a way to get them out of the country as fast as possible. They don't belong here. Send them somewhere else. So, I mean, there's a lot of people that we could probably stand to risk in a battle of some sort, but we don't want to risk troops. And so people come to these questions. This might be the best part of this episode. I'm about to break down things I hear over and over again that are not really true, but the media they're like the kids that copy each other's homework or whatever. If I was a teacher and I saw the media, I'd be like, wait a minute, you've all copied Rachel Maddow's homework on this, because one person will say something and then they'll all kind of say it and they'll run it in the ground. So like a lot of times I don't watch MSNBC or CNN. I don't really watch cable news or stay glued to it. But during the Ukrainian conflict, I've been watching it a lot more regularly. I watch it way more than I have in the last several years, because they have on the ground reporting. They have the Ukrainian people when they're telling their stories. That's pretty great. But a lot of times when they interview these pundits, and these people are wrong about everything. I mean, I really want to emphasize that, because they're always wrong. And so when Alabama liberal says something like, the only way this conflict ends is Vladimir Putin dead, that's the only fucking way this is going to end, and we need to wrap our heads around that. Oh no, you're wrong. Alabama liberal's crazy. He's talking about assassinations. That's so fucking nuts and crazy. Is it crazy though? Is it crazier to be Putin and think you can invade Ukraine, hold Ukraine, annex Ukraine, keep Ukraine, your economy goes back to normal, all the sanctions disappear, the entire Western world and Japan says, hey, to the victor go the spoils, and finders keepers, and we weren't for it at first, but now that you've got the country, we'll let you have it. Go ahead and take Moldova while you're at it, because we don't need Moldova. Is that more realistic? Or is it more realistic to think that a 69-year-old man that everybody hates winds up dead, and that's what needs to happen? And the media always says things like, well, we can't allow Putin to be killed, or we can't kill him, or we can't even antagonize him too much because we don't want to start World War III. Well, if he invades Ukraine and Belarus brings troops in, which they talked about a lot, the Belarusian president said they were going to, Lukashenko, and now he's kind of backed off out of it. But he's already got Chechen troops in Ukraine. He's already got some Syrian troops in Ukraine. If he brings Belarus, Chechnya, and Syria into the Ukrainian, and then they invade Moldova, and then they keep pushing it and maybe try to invade NATO territory, how is that not already World War III? How is that not already started? People keep saying, well, this is the biggest land invasion in Europe since the end of World War II. How is it not already World War III if several countries decide to basically try to take Ukraine, absorb Ukraine? He's got several vassal states, which Syria pretty much is his bitch, and that's why they're sending troops there. Not that the Syrian people want to be in Ukraine at all. They don't want any fucking thing to do with this. He's probably told Assad, you owe us. You send us at least 100 people so we can say there's a coalition of the willing that are here and they're doing this. Russia's a nuclear-armed powered country. Ukraine used to be. They gave up their nuclear weapons, which I think is probably a sign never to give up your nuclear weapons. I mean, Ukraine would not be invaded if they still had nuclear weapons right now. There's no way Russia would be doing this. But if they involve that and then perhaps a conflict with NATO, how is that not World War III? Then people say, well, Putin If you challenge him too much, he's going to make this a nuclear war. We have to give Putin everything he wants. And this makes me sick when I hear this kind of basic mentality from the media. Oh, well, if we challenge Putin too much or we irritate him too much, he's just going to go crazy and he'll use nuclear weapons or something. You see cowards like Matt Welsh. I know Tucker Carlson's a Russian asset. I strongly suspect the people that run Reason magazine, I think they might be. I think Matt Welsh might be, because a lot of these they're national media outlets, but they're not that big, and they have to use private donations and funding. They have to get people to send them money so they can keep it kind of going. And who gives a shit about Reason magazine? Not a lot of people. The American media has been really hit the last 10 years or so. Like Newsweek is now online only, and so a lot of these magazines that existed forever, they got really battered. I think they've had to turn to all these sugar daddies to kind of keep them going, and it's whatever message that they want out there. So is it really a stretch to say like Oleg Deripaska has paid Matt Welsh to maybe be more on the side of Russia than he would have been? It's not a stretch to say that, not a huge leap to really make that conclusion. But even if he's not, he's a total coward, because he's basically advocating appeasement, which never ever works. I put up a video on the Alabama Liberals YouTube channel about this. Appeasement never works. Cutting the head off the snake does. But when they talk about nuclear weapons for killing Vladimir Putin, first of all, the only person who could authorize that is Vladimir Putin, and he's dead in this scenario. Putin's going to want revenge for killing him. He's dead. There's a power vacuum, and you have different security service people, different government ministers, cabinet officials, oligarchs, things like that. They're going to be swirling around, and it's going to be who's going to succeed him. So there's going to be a fight for a few weeks, maybe a few months, where there's all this chaos. People aren't even sure who the next president's going to be. Let's say that it was Dmitry Medvedev. He was Putin's puppet for the 4 years he had to pretend he wasn't in charge of the country because of term limits. So Medvedev's the most experienced. He's been president before. He's probably the most aligned with Putin of any of them, even though it's been said that Putin and him don't get along that well. Putin has basically put him out to the side, if you'll notice. He's basically shoved him off to the side. He's basically the Mike Pence of Russia, in my opinion. Putin is the Donald Trump, and he's pushed him off to the side, and so Medvedev has been pushed around, and he's such a suck ass, and he's always trying to suck up to Putin. I think if Putin's dead, I don't think he does that shit anymore. I think it's almost like Dmitry Unchained or whatever, where he can do the country the way he'd like to see it done. And I don't think it's starting a fucking nuclear war with anybody. I don't think anybody who takes over is going to want to start that. For what? For revenge for Putin, who they're probably relieved is dead. This guy that they're just terrified of, he's out of the way. And now they have to make their own way in the world. Russia's hit by sanctions. Their economy sucks. They're about to default on their debt. Their ruble is worth less than an American penny. Whoever takes over after him, they have to find a way to get rid of these goddamn sanctions. And launching a nuclear weapon at the United States is not a way to get rid of the sanctions. It's not a way to get rid of anything. So all their problems, they don't get less, they magnify them. They got to find a way to end the war in Ukraine. They have to find a way to basically pull back their military and fix their military, because at that point there's probably riots in the streets going on, and they need the military back in Russia to put those down. They need a way to get rid of the economic sanctions. You've got all these different power players that are now like, we made a deal with Putin. We didn't make a deal with you. So you've got the guy in Chechnya who they're scared of. You've got Lukashenko in Belarus. You've got all these dictators that are like, now that the big boss is out of the way, we need to renegotiate some things and make a better deal. There's going to be a lot of jockeying for power. And they're going to have to find a way to balance their few remaining allies, Belarus and Chechnya, with the oligarchs who are mad as fuck because all their money's the security service people who want to know, who's this new guy and what makes he think he can lead us? And maybe he can and maybe he can't. What's in it for us, right? Everybody's thinking that. What's in it for us? So they have to find a way to balance all these different personalities and get them all on board with the new regime, and to not make themselves such a pariah state to Europe, the United States, Australia, Japan, basically the entire United Nations except for China and North Korea. And they've got to find a way to end the war in Ukraine, which is becoming increasingly unpopular and costing them a lot of money. Whoever takes over a country in that kind of position, the last fucking thing on earth they want is a nuclear war or an exchange of nuclear weapons with any country. It's just not the way that they're going to do things. Then people would say, well, yeah, but what stops the generals from organizing it after Putin's dead? They still need permission, right? So Perimeter, which is a Russian program, it says that the top people, the general staff, they can get around the commanders on the ground to order it, because they were afraid, I suppose, of the scenario where they give an order to a low-level military official and he doesn't want to do it, which has happened before. Well, even the general staff, they still need somebody in charge of them to tell them to launch the nuclear weapons. They can't just do it. They need a president or some head. When Putin's dead, there's no clear line of succession. There is no president. It's not like the United States. If they kill Joe Biden, Kamala Harris is president, and she's going to be pretty fucking pissed. That's why democracies work, because there's a sense of justice. Democracies are much more retaliatory because there's a clear line of succession, and they're motivated by justice. A dictatorship, they're not motivated by justice. Putin's inner circle and his inner cabinet, what's in it for me? What are you going to do for me? I need to know what I'm going to get out of this. And so because his inner cabinet has never shown any other inclination besides that, it's very hard for them to say, well, Putin's dead. He can no longer do a thing for us. Let's get revenge for him anyway. Decapitation really works. I call it decapitation. Some people call it anti-terrorism or counterterrorism. There's the doctrine of appeasement, which never fucking works, ever. A sociopath is going to look at you as weak, and they're going to take as much as they can possibly get out of you. And we've seen that from Hitler. We see that with Trump. Susan Collins is like, oh, I didn't vote to impeach Trump the first time because he learned his lesson, and then he immediately gets worse. The first impeachment completely emboldened him to become batshit crazy and do 10 times worse things. When people today, when they say, oh, is it worth it to prosecute Donald Trump? Is that even worth it? I'm like, of course it's worth it. Because if you don't, is he going to get better? They never get better. Republicans never get better unless they get socked in the goddamn nose. They have to be humbled before they get better. We've made that calculated risk of, well, we won't push Watergate, where they broke into the DNC and they saw some files or whatever. We're not going to push that. And then Ford pardoned him anyways. And then what happens? Ronald Reagan makes a deal with Iran to hurt Jimmy Carter a few years later. We won't really go after that. What happens after that? They try to impeach Bill Clinton for a blowjob. Well, the Clinton impeachment, okay, that was crazy, and we can't believe that they did that. But they've learned their lesson. Florida 2000, they steal Florida from Al Gore. Okay, well, Bush is president, and we're going to let him slide on all this stuff, and that'll be okay. Obama in 2008, he decides not to prosecute anybody in the Bush White House for anything, no matter what crimes they did, no matter how awful they were. We're going to let all that go. But Republicans, they'll appreciate that. They'll play ball with us. Nope, they spread a lie about birtherism, and then when they take back the Senate, they block every single one of Obama's court picks and even steal a Supreme Court pick from him. And then that happens, and then they elect the guy in 2016 who's the chief birther and the chief asshole. And even though Hillary won 3 million more votes, and she was probably entitled to a recount in some of these close Midwestern swing states where she only lost by 70,000, she's not going to do that. And then that'll be a good example for Trump. And then nope. In 2020, he loses by a landslide, and he still fucking raves hell about it, still talks about it, still brings it up. They're never going to learn. They're never going to get any better if you don't sock them in the nose, because that's what a bully respects. They only respect fear. Oh, I'll give them Ukraine today, and they'll be so appreciative that they're going to become a better place and a better country. We've made that calculation with him. Georgia, 2008, he invaded that, didn't do shit about it, and just let that go. Then in 2014, he annexes Crimea. Then in 2016, he interferes with the American presidential election. He's tried to interfere in elections from Germany to France. He caused a massive cyber attack in Estonia where he basically shut off their power grid. We've put up with this shit for a long time. And we've let it go, and it's never gotten better, and it's only gotten worse. And now he's 69 years old, and that's why he's like, fuck it. Fuck it, I'm going to go out there and I'm just going to do this because I'm not going to live forever. People say, well, how come he's doing this under Biden and he didn't do it under Trump? How come Trump was the only one where he didn't attack or whatever? And I'm like, because he's a puppet. And he thought if Trump got elected to a second term, Trump would pull us out of NATO, which he said many times he wanted to do. The only reason he didn't do it in his first term is because he was trying to get reelected. Okay, so Trump gets elected to a second term, then he's totally off the fucking rails. There's nothing constraining him. He's replaced all the same people like Kelly and Mathis and all them. He's replaced them with yes men that will do whatever the hell he says, no matter how crazy it is. He pulls us out of NATO, and then Russia can run the table, because without the United States, the only country in the world with the nuclear arsenal to rival Russia, then is England. Are they going to commit massive troops? Is France going to commit massive troops? Are they going to send people to defend Estonia if Putin wants to take that back? Probably not. And the fact that he staged the massive cyber attack there shows he may want it back. He may want the entire Soviet Union back. And if the United States isn't in NATO, there's not really a lot of military deterrent to stop him from doing something like that. I was looking up the list of the world's biggest militaries. It's kind of scary, because out of the top 10, only the United States is really committed to democracies and freedom. I mean, I was just trying to even find England's military. You have to go way, way, way down the list. But I mean, England's military is only like 300,000 troops, which is not a lot considering that there was so many more countries that had more than that. But I'm looking at this, I'm like, wow, out of the top 10, none of them are truly committed to democracy and freedom. We know India, even though it is a democracy, it's not really committed to those principles around the globe. It hasn't really fought a lot to preserve those kind of things. And so out of the countries that are the most militaristic, if you take out the United States, there's really nobody that would totally stand in the way of like fascist countries wanting to, say, reabsorb Taiwan in China's case, take over Ukraine in Russia's case. North Korea could take back over South Korea and probably nothing would stop them, especially if China was backing them up. So if the United States retreats from the globe, a lot of the democracies would be in a very bad place in Europe and Asia because there's essentially nothing that stands in their way from trying to do what Hitler did during World War II. So this is one of the reasons that I think Putin was just biding his time and kind of putting up with it, and then Trump gets in his second term, and then he just does it. He just does whatever Putin wants for him to do. When I say war on reality, we live in an age where Trump, even though he wanted to end NATO, he can go out there and say, I was the biggest supporter of NATO. NATO stood because of me. I'm the one that saved NATO, and I tried to save it, and Dan Biden's wrecked it. Or he can go out there and say, Putin wouldn't be attacking Ukraine if I were president. Well, of course, there's no way to prove one way or the other what Putin would or wouldn't do, but we very much doubt that that's true or whatever, but that's the war on reality. Things that are not true, objectively false. We can find videos of Trump shitting all over NATO, and his first impeachment was preventing arms sales to Ukraine. He said, hey, you got to give me blackmailing Hunter Biden if you want this aid and these weapons. That was the first impeachment. So this idea that he was better for Ukraine is, nobody could say it. That's not him. It's so unbelievably ludicrous to think that's what motivates the first impeachment, but that's the war on reality. In Florida, we have to pass an anti-woke bill because we have to save kids from the wokesters that are trying to hurt them. Well, nobody's asking the black kids what's better for them. I'm pretty sure that it's not going to be an environment where they can't even discuss race, can't even talk about it, and any teacher that's sympathetic to them or tries to talk about it, they're going to get fired. I'm pretty sure that's not what's better for them. The war on reality, I think, partially comes from what I call the comic-conization. That's basically a media environment where everything is entertainment and frivolous. If you look at movies, those of you that are older, perhaps you grew up watching movies in the 60s and 70s, there was a real movement. The late 60s and almost the entire 70s, there was a real movement to make life more what it actually was. The gritty movies of the 70s. Like in 1972, the highest grossing film of all time was The Godfather. This is a 3-hour crime epic where about a quarter of the movie is in Italian subtitles. It's very much a movie for adults. And that's fantastic that a movie like that could be such an enormous hit. But this is a movie about reality. These are real people. They don't have superpowers. They don't shoot lasers out of their eyes, or there's not an alien invasion. Everything that happens in that movie could really happen. Highest grossing movies today, not one of them are like that. I mean, not one of them. The Spider-Man 7, this is about a multiverse where he meets different versions of himself and villains from all over the multiverse come together, and there's a sorcerer and everybody's got superpowers. Not even an attempt to reflect reality. I was curious because somebody put on Twitter that said, could you make Pulp Fiction today? And I went back and looked at the movies that were released in 1994. Out of the top 10 highest grossing movies, 7 out of 10 were original screenplays. Meaning 7 out of 10 were not based on a comic book. No, they weren't sequels or anything else. And I thought that was pretty interesting because today when you look at the top 10 highest grossing movies, none of them. 2021, not one movie out of the 10 highest grossing was an original piece of property. Not one of them. And almost all of them were sequels, reboots, remakes, adaptations, continuations of the Marvel franchise, all of them. And so people have really gotten into this mindset of they don't like original movies and they want something that's based on something they've seen before and it can't have anything to do with reality or what's going on right now. It's got to be superheroes, aliens, robots, even something that technically revolves around real people, like the Fast and Furious franchise. The shit they do is so ludicrous. I mean, they might as well be cartoon characters. But that's where people's minds are at. Everything's got to be Comic-Con all the time. And that's why when you look at our media and they're forced to focus on something real, something that's not frivolous, it's almost like they don't know how to do it. They're constantly finding ways to like, how can we make Ukraine about what we'd rather talk about? How can we make it about race? So I keep seeing these things about the only reason we care about Ukraine is because it's a white country invading a white country and America doesn't care. That's bullshit. And the people saying that, and that actually kind of makes me mad. Number one, it's really dehumanizing to the Ukrainian people. Oh, well, they're blonde and blue-eyed, and that's why we care about them. They're dying right now. Like, their houses are being destroyed. They're getting killed. They're getting invaded. They went to bed one night, relative standard of living, and they woke up the next day and their house is gone, their husband's being conscripted to fight in a war, them and their kids are fleeing, they might be stranded refugees in Poland for years. Their reality's been shattered. And so to break it down to like, oh, well, they've got the good life because they're white, it's just crap, honestly. And then also, too, it's not even true. So to saying something like that, it's not only dehumanizing and self-absorbed, It's ignorant, because if you look back at the wars America's actually fought, Vietnam, we committed massive troops and massive resources. That was a war that was already going on. I know we get blamed for Vietnam, but that had already been happening before America got involved in that. Korea, the same thing. South Korea wouldn't exist if the United States hadn't gotten involved in the Korean War. There's no way North Korea would have lost. The whole country would be North Korea right now. So South Korea exists because of this. Vietnam, we committed major resources. The Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, and then even in something like Africa, where we don't have a lot of strategic interests, Black Hawk Down. Those of you living in Alabama, there's a Senate candidate for Richard Shelby's Senate seat. This guy's awful, but he runs these commercials. Joe Biden disgusts me and all these kind of things, because this guy was in the Black Hawk Down mission. And I guess that qualifies him to be a senator 30 years later. These were American troops getting killed in Somalia, where we had no real strategic interest. That was a pure humanitarian mission. Then you have the 4 or 5 troops that got killed in Niger during Trump's first year in office. He seemed surprised that we even had troops in Niger. I don't think he even knew about it. Then you had Benghazi, which we investigated ad nauseum. An American ambassador got killed in Benghazi. Barack Obama, he blew up Muammar Gaddafi's army because Gaddafi's army was going to massacre civilians. They blew up his army. That's enabled them to overthrow Gaddafi for good. So this idea that we're just not involved in Africa, or we just only care about those kind of wars, it's just bullshit. You look back at our military conflicts, that's been reflected over and over again. Plus, the same journalists who were saying that, I go back and look at their articles and their tweets, I don't see anything. There was a coup in Burkina Faso about a month before Russia invaded Ukraine. They don't talk about that. So I'm like, it's really hypocrisy for them to sit there and say, oh, we only care about the white conflict. I'm like, where's all your stuff about the coups that have happened in Africa over the last year? There's been about 4 of them. I don't see any of your articles about that. Are you talking about that? So it's a very self-absorbed perspective of, I'm trying to be a good person. I'm trying to lord it over somebody else. And yet you look at it and I'm like, but they're not really using their platform to discuss these things that they say the American media doesn't care about, even as they're in the fucking media, even as they work for Newsweek or something. So I don't think that's true, and I don't believe it's true that if we killed Vladimir Putin, there would be a nuclear exchange, and I don't believe it's true that we have to give him everything he wants, or else there'll be a nuclear exchange. I don't think that any of these things the media is saying are true, and that comes back to how wrong the media usually is. The same people who told us, number one, well, Putin's not going to invade. That was the first thing they said, and that turned out to be spectacularly untrue, but they didn't believe it. They kept saying, oh, Joe Biden said he was going to invade, so there's no way he's going to invade because Joe Biden, he's just trying to stir up drama or something. I can't believe people were saying that. They're like, oh, Joe Biden, he's just being dramatic and trying to help his poll numbers and all this stuff. And I'm like, Joe Biden's not that kind of person. I mean, he's just not the kind of person that wants to stir up drama or anything. I mean, it's like the antithesis of who he is. I mean, he's not Trump, for God's sake. So I can't believe that they were saying that. But they first said Putin wouldn't invade. Tucker Carlson said that if he thought Putin was going to invade, Biden wouldn't have sent Kamala Harris to talk to NATO because she's not a serious person. Well, of course, Kamala Harris is the vice president of the United States. That's about as serious as it gets. He didn't make those concerns when Mike Pence was sent to South Korea to stare at the North Korean border. You know, Mike Pence, he stared at Kim Jong-un. And I'm surprised the North Koreans didn't just say, oh, we surrender, their weapons in the ocean and just walk across to South Korea or something. So he didn't say that when that happened. And then Pence got sent to a professional football game to stare at the NFL players who took a knee, make a big huff of leaving. And I mean, nobody ever questioned when Mike Pence was put in charge of COVID. So yeah, the vice presidency's a pretty serious job. He also didn't bring that up when Jared Kushner, Trump's unelected dumbass son-in-law with no qualifications and wasn't elected to any job, he didn't question that when he was sent to the Middle East. And that's just Tucker Carlson being another racist asshole bigot to where he doesn't think Kamala's a serious person and he wants to see Ketanji Brown Jackson's LSAT scores. And earlier when I mentioned the video I made about how they hijacked Republicans and conservatism, I think bigotry is a huge part of it, white supremacy is a huge part of it. Out of the top 10 countries in terms of population, the only 2 that are majority white are the United States and Russia. They're the only 2 in the top 10 most populated nations that are majority white. Majority of Russians are Christians. I think that's part of it too. Oil is another part of it, to where the fossil fuel lovers that just love oil economies. As I've mentioned before, America's enemies run on fossil fuels, OPEC and all those countries. I mean, every enemy we have primarily runs on fossil fuels. Even China, which we think about as a diversified economy, their 3 largest companies, they're state-owned fossil fuel companies. The state gets a lot of money from oil and gas and coal and Another thing the media has been wrong about is they say, oh, the sanctions, they don't really work and they're not going to work. And of course they are working. And I saw the media say that. So even after they'd already been wrong about invading altogether and the strength of the Ukrainian resistance and that Russia would be able to keep it going, we're seeing Russian tanks break down. Half their tanks been to goddamn jump from AAA. And they're like, oh, our tanks are breaking down. Some of the soldiers are drilling holes into their own gas tanks so they don't have to fight. The soldiers don't want to be there. They'll be like, oh, well, the people, they're not going to rise up. We've seen 10,000 people arrested in Russia so far protesting this war. That's only going to become worse as the economy gets worse. They're like, well, the security establishment's united behind Putin. We've already seen him arrest the FSV chief in charge of international affairs, possibly because he was already planning to stage a coup or do something to him. And now they've been like, oh, the sanctions never worked before in countries. Why did they not work before? Because Russia was always there to bail countries out. Russia single-handedly prevented the sanctions from Cuba from becoming as bad as they could have been. They were giving money to Cuba, Iran, Venezuela, Syria, North Korea. So they've always been the one giving money to these pariah states. Who's going to bail out Russia? Oh, well, China might bail them out. Today we saw them literally go to China and say, we need money. We have no money. We're running out of money. They're begging China for help to help them out. And the United States is telling China, stay out of this shit. You better stay out of this because we mean it. The same sanctions will be going towards you if you try to help them out. Again, the media was dead wrong about saying the sanctions couldn't work, and we're already seeing that they do work. If they run out of money, they can't wage war. And a big part of the way that they're funded is through oil money. First, they said that Putin wouldn't invade, which was wrong. Then they said that, oh, Ukraine, there's no way they can withstand that. They might as well just surrender. Boebert basically said that they shouldn't even fight Russia or whatever. Well, that was wrong as well. Ukraine has put up an incredible resistance for 3 weeks. I mean, it's been really incredible that they've been able to fight them back. People said, oh, Zelensky, he's a dead man walking. As of this recording, knock on wood, he's still alive. They still haven't taken Kiev. And so all of the predictions that they made have been wrong all the way. So why would we listen to them when they say we have to give Putin Ukraine or he'll blow us up? His reign is forever lasting. Only they would think a 69-year-old man who clearly has some kind of mental problems and is not in the best physical condition, his reign has to last forever. Why? Because the same people who are always wrong, they tell us it's the only way that we can get out of this. I consider this all connective tissue of the war on reality that we see every single day from the media, from the Republican Party, from Putin and his machine of propaganda that we see constantly, from social media, which is littered with Russian bots. And this is where we get a lot of our information from, people that are deliberately spreading bullshit and propaganda. You see Russian bots on Twitter all the time. And it's hard to distinguish them from actual right-wingers because the way they write, it looks like English isn't their first language in both cases. So it could just be a Republican who just mangles the English language like Trump does, and that's why they like him so much. Or it could actually be a Russian bot who's like, you must not challenge Russia. That would be a bad mistake. I'm American. I believe America, stay in America. That's what's good. Tulsi Gabbard, 2024. Talking about useful idiots in the media, we saw Michael Flynn, Trump's puppet. I mentioned him earlier before as one of the people that was fully on board with the QAnon thing, even though it turned out to be an entire hoax. And somebody who had less government experience than he did was pulling his chain and telling him, well, we saw him being like, somebody like Putin needs to be supported because he's trying to disrupt Bill Gates's new world order. Well, that just goes to show the extent that conspiracy theories have invaded the right wing and totally hijacked them. And the same people who believe in QAnon and Bill Gates is putting computer chips into people. Michael Flynn, as a military commander, when somebody like that talks about the new world order, what he's talking about is the current world order, the world order that the United States rules. After World War II, organizations like the United Nations and NATO and things like that put together, these alliances help the United States. It's a world order that we sit on top of and collaborate with other countries. They help us, we help them. It's a peaceful, harmonious world order that we're kind of in charge of. So when you see morons like him and Tucker Carlson attack the liberal world order, Peter Thiel also talked about the liberal world order. It's made him rich. It's put him as one of the wealthiest men on the planet or whatever. So you have to look at this and think, what is driving this insanity? I think it's all part of that war on reality where it's like they're not even trying to change things. They just want to change the way we think about things. It's not that they're actually trying to fix income inequality. It's to say income inequality doesn't exist. It's not that they're actually trying to fix racism. It's to say critical race theory. That's where the racists, that's where they are. Talking about race, diversity and inclusion programs. That's where the racists live. Affirmative action, oh, now that's where the race is, because we support equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome. That's some bullshit Tucker Carlson always says, even as whenever a black person is actually chosen for a good job, oh, Kamala Harris isn't serious just because I say so, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, she's not qualified because we want to see her LSAT scores. So whenever somebody who actually does work their way up, as Barack Obama and Kamala Harris and Brown Jackson, whenever they actually do work their way up the system, that's when people go nuts and talk about, oh, it's rigged. It's rigged against us. Tucker Carlson, who was born to a family that's worth $500 million, and Trump, who inherited $400 million from his dad, and the Koch brothers, who were made billionaires by inheriting a private company that was enormously successful. So those people who were born on not just third base, but home plate, it's rigged against them because somebody's looking at affirmative action candidates to attempt to let somebody good through the system. This is the war on reality, and it's everywhere we look, and I'm tired of it, and I'm ready to end it. Hopefully, in the meantime, Ukrainians can stay strong. I truly believe that if this war goes on for another few months, I think we've seen the last of Vladimir Putin, and I hope that we have. I believe he's the biggest threat to the international order. I believe if he dies, I think Alexander Navalny or somebody like that could take over Russia. I don't think there's any reason that Russia has to be at the West. The West, they're so fucking full of shit, the West. Like they have a lot in common with China. There's no reason at all that Russia couldn't become Germany. We used to be at war with Germany and Japan. And now look, I mean, America has a great habit of that. England was our enemies for a long, long time. We fought several wars with England. Now they're our best friends. We have a long history of being able to do this successfully with countries. We used to have the Philippines. The Philippines used to be an American territory. They're not anymore. We don't want them to be. We have relatively good relations. It's okay to say things change and we move on and we wish you well and thanks for the laughs or whatever. I mean, like, there's just no sense in keeping this hostility going. And the War of 1812, that was with Canada. Obviously, except for Trump, almost every American president has had excellent relations with Canada. This is something we easily could do with Russia. If Alexander Navalny or somebody decent was president, for most Russian people, they could be part of a thriving democracy, a great and prosperous economy. This is what we want for them. There's no reason we should be enemies with this country. And this is what we'd like to see happen with them. Ultimately, I think these choices are going to be made in 2022, which has been one of the most depressing years on record. And you almost wish you could put it into a more lucky year, but it's here now, and we need it to happen now. Year of the Tiger, indeed. Okay, everybody, thanks for listening.